Welcome back to the film room, everyone. We're going to be doing something a little bit different this week because unfortunately NFL GamePass is still completely broken. If you haven't been following the news about NFL GamePass, they rolled out a new version about a week and a half ago and it's still completely unusable. You can't get into the All-22, half the plays don't load, it's kind of a mess, but they're working on fixing it. They're just migrating over everything from the old service to the new one, so they said it's going to take a while to fix it. I've been sitting on a Tyreek Hill breakdown for about 2 weeks now, but until Game Pass gets fixed, I can't finish that episode because I can't capture plays without Game Pass. So this week, to make up for not having a Tyreek Hill breakdown, I'm going to do a video on something that I've wanted to do for a while, and that's how to draft properly in fantasy football. Winning your fantasy league is, in my opinion, about 80% how you draft and 20% everything you do after that, and that includes trades and waiver wire. If you have a strong draft, you don't have to trade as much and you don't have to hit the waiver wire as much. So really getting it right in that moment in the draft makes it so that you don't have to play catch up for the next 3 to 4 months. So here are a quick 5 rules that I follow when drafting for my teams. Rule number 1, there is no clear best draft strategy, no matter what anybody else tells you. You can draft well while executing basically any strategy you want. You don't have to obey current trends if you don't want to. You can do the 0 running back route. You can do running back early. You can do tight end early. You can do tight end late. You can take the first quarterback if you want Aaron Rodgers in the 2nd or 3rd round. You can do that if you want to. You can also wait for quarterback really late. You can take the first defense if you strongly believe in them, like whether it's the Texans or the Broncos or something like that. You can save defense for the last round and just stream them all season if you really want to. You can win in so many different ways in fantasy that letting somebody else tell you that one of those ways is superior to all the other ways, that's just flat out wrong to me. I've won doing basically all the strategies that I just talked about. At one point or another, I've done every single one of them, and I've won with every single one of them. So don't feel like you need to be pinned into a corner and doing what everybody else says works. Do what you want to do. Now, that being said, everything that you see and hear from here on out is what I do, and it's what tends to be really effective for me, so it's probably worth trying, but you don't necessarily have to do exactly what I do. Have some fun with it and make some modifications if you feel like it. That's what makes fantasy football so great. If you don't want to follow trends, you can set the trends yourself. Now, rule number 2, and this is something that I feel very strongly about, instead of having all of your players listed on one continuous big board, isolate your rankings by position. Don't have all of the positions on the same big board because that can lead to you confusing and second guessing yourself very easily. Now, you isolate out all these players into their own position groups for a few reasons. First, it helps you see which rounds have the most or the least value at certain positions. For instance, based on my current rankings for wide receivers as seen right here, and these are probably going to change eventually, but right now, I think the deepest round is round 2, and the thinnest round out of the first 7 is round 6. That means that out of those first 7 rounds, the second round is the easiest one to find a good talent value at the position. It also means that round 3 is highly likely to have a second round talent fall into it. It's unlikely that all of them are going to be off the board by the end of the second round, so if you're picking at the top of the 3rd round, you can plan on having one of these guys fall to you, or at the very least, you can expect that one of them will be available. And that ties into why you isolate everything out by position, because isolating by position helps you to compare the depth at certain rounds to other positions like running back, quarterback, tight end, etc., so you can get a good sense of what you need to be more aggressive in targeting and when. If you feel like running back is really thin in the first round, but receiver is really deep in the 2nd and 3rd rounds, then that might help you kind of formulate a plan to take a running back early in the first round because it is so thin, and just knowing that more than likely you'll be able to get your receivers in round 2 and 3. Identifying the deep areas of a draft at certain positions is what helps you make a plan, and having a plan is what helps you draft consistently. Now, to aid in that plan and kind of working on the fly as the draft unfolds, make sure to follow rule number 3, which is to color code your rankings as you are in the middle of the draft so that you can quickly and easily see who is gone and who is still on the board. With you ideally already identifying which rounds are deep and which rounds are shallow based on your positional rankings, color coding can help you keep track in real time of how fast that depth is being whittled down. If you see a column turning red before your eyes, that helps you recognize when runs are taking place and how you can plan around them. If there's still enough value that you can participate in the run, by all means participate. But if you feel like there's value at another position that people aren't noticing, these color codes can help you zig when everybody's zagging. For example, in my test rankings here, I have several first and second round receivers in red to show that they're gone. The green receivers are still available. Doing this lets me quickly identify what I deem to be a first round receiver in DeAndre Hopkins still on the board. Now, whether or not you agree Hopkins is a first rounder is pretty irrelevant to this conversation because we're all going to be using our personal rankings. We're not necessarily talking about who is where here, we're talking about the structure of how everything is put together. Now, after identifying that I've still got Hopkins on the board and that I see him as a first round pick, I can then compare that first round receiver to my other positional rankings to see if I have any first round running backs or tight ends available. And after seeing if they're available, I decide between those first round options across all positions for who to draft. These color codes become even more important as the draft goes on because they show you in real time which round values for certain positions are getting picked clean and which ones are not. If all of your second round receivers are red by the end of the second round, you're going to notice that pretty quickly. And then when you look at your running backs and you see some green second round running backs, that automatically tells you where the value still is on your board, so you don't have all these panic situations where you're trying to decide between whether you want to continue the run on receivers or just go and get a running back. For me, the color codes just simplify everything and let me make decisions very quickly. And like I said before, which names you have in which order doesn't really matter to me. Everyone has their own opinions, but structuring it this way lets you stay true to your rankings and not fall for the trap of going with the consensus. If everyone followed the consensus all the time, then there really wouldn't be any point to this game. So draft whoever you believe in and see if it works out, because if you win with your guys, it feels a hell of a lot better. And this brings me to rule number 4, and this is a big one that I follow in terms of strategy, whereas all the other rules have been about structure. Let the draft come to you. Don't be overly aggressive at a certain position or with a certain strategy just because you feel like you have to target that position or that you have to execute a certain pick order. You don't have to do anything in fantasy football. That's why it's so fun. If everybody else in your league is going on an unexpected run at quarterback in round 7, and you were planning all along to take a quarterback in round 7, but then you suddenly notice a really nice value at wide receiver, let's say Davante Adams somehow fell that far, just take Davante Adams and worry about your quarterback later. Unless, of course, and the exception to this would be that you have a quarterback that is graded even higher than Adams still on the board, then you want that quarterback just because he's a better value, but that goes back to what I said earlier. Use your individual positional rankings to identify value and draft based off of comparing those values rather than comparing positional scarcity. If they're just going to give you a 4th or 5th round value in Davante Adams in the 7th round, it would be dumb to turn that down for a 7th round value at quarterback, even if you still don't have one on the roster. Take the value that the rest of your league gives you. I promise you that your teams will end up being stronger and deeper in the long run just because you're the one that always gets value. And speaking of value, rule number 5, this one's very important. Do not be afraid of rookies. I drafted Ezekiel Elliott, Dak Prescott, and Tyreek Hill last year and played all of them, and they got me to the championship game. My league has return yardage factored in, by the way, so Tyreek Hill literally outscored Julio Jones, who was also on my team because I took Julio 2nd overall. People thought I was crazy for taking both of them so high, but it worked out because I believed in the values that I assigned to them. Like I said, don't be a slave to the consensus. Do what you believe in, and it's going to work out more often than not. Now, back to rookies, at least for me, they are consistently the best source of value I can get because they're always going to be pushed down the board. I had Michael Thomas graded as a 1st round pick in the 2016 NFL draft. He ended up going in the 2nd round. However, in fantasy drafts, he was being taken somewhere around the 13th round and vastly outperformed that pick. He was a legitimate wide receiver too that people were able to rely on all season long, and they got him with one of their last 2 or 3 picks. That's unbelievable. And if you're in a keeper league, you're set forever because he's still going to be a very good value. That's why you always want to be identifying which rookies can give you that same value and target them relentlessly. Most top 5 or even top 10 picks in actual NFL drafts are going to have massive discounts in fantasy drafts just because nobody's seen them play yet. But if you know which ones you want to target and which ones you think are going to pop off early in their career, the return on investment potential is just insane. And it happens every year, whether it's Michael Thomas or Ezekiel Elliott last year or Odell Beckham and Mike Evans a few years ago. Every single year there are rookies that have Pro Bowl caliber seasons, and you want to predict as many of those as possible to fill out your depth. My drafts, like I mentioned earlier, always tend to be very, very rookie heavy because I study so much college tape, and I usually have a pretty good handle on who is ready to produce right away and who is not. If you watching this at home right now can get good at identifying rookie contributors based on their college tape, as well as how good of a situation they got drafted into, you can drastically improve how deep your teams are. Personally, I really do not use the waiver wire that much. I know a lot of people say that the waiver wire is where you win your league, and that's true to a degree if you're maybe streaming defenses or streaming quarterbacks or maybe filling in for injuries. But if you draft well enough in the first place and you identify these big rookie contributors that you can use to fill out your depth, you won't even have to go dumpster diving. You'll have your frontline starters that you drafted early, and you'll have your high upside, potentially boom or bust depth already on the roster in the form of rookies. I just use waivers to fill in for injured players from time to time, but if my roster's healthy, there are seasons where I go literally more than a month without even picking up anyone. If you draft well, you don't need to rely on the trash bin, so focus as much of your effort as you can on hitting those late round picks because I promise they will be the backbone of your team. Or at the very least, they're usually the backbone of mine. So to recap these rules for how I personally tend to draft in fantasy football, let's run through them again real quickly. Rule number 1, don't be a slave to trends. Do what you want to do, not what everyone else tells you to do, and that includes me. If you think I'm wrong, don't do what I do. At the end of the day, I'd rather lose the game doing what I believe in rather than what everyone else believes in, and I'm sure most of you watching this feel the same way. Rule number 2, organize rankings by position and keep them separate from each other. If you do it this way, it will help you to identify depth or lack of depth at certain rounds and remain unbiased when making snap decisions during the draft. Rule number 3, color code your rankings as the draft goes on so that you can keep track of who is available and which areas of your board still hold the most value from round to round. Rule number 4, draft based on value, not based on positional scarcity. If you're going to try to play catch up all day long, chasing these runs and getting the 15th running back instead of the 10th wide receiver, that is not a recipe for success. Just take whatever values you can get and use them as the strength of your team. And that brings us to rule number 5, do not be afraid of rookies. They are the single greatest source of value you can have in terms of production versus investment, so make sure to use rookies as your high upside depth whenever possible. You never know when you're going to hit a home run and get the next Tyreek Hill or the next Jordan Howard, so you might as well take as many swings at the bat as you can. If you take one thing away from this video, it is this: if you hit on those late round picks, you will win a championship. Okay? Okay. Alright, that about does it for this week's, I guess you could call it an impromptu fantasy special? Yeah, I kinda like that, but anyway, on the screen are this week's Patreon supporters, all of these wonderful people that have donated to the channel to keep the lights on and ensure that more content can be released every single week. I could not do this without any of you, so thank you again. Hopefully by next week, NFL GamePass returns to its full functionality so that I can use it and release this Tyreek Hill breakdown that I've been sitting on for what seems like an eternity. If it still does not work, I'll find something else to do an episode on. Maybe I'll do a podcast or something of that nature. But anyway, we'll just see what happens. Either way, I will have something for you guys next Thursday. I just don't really know what it is yet. So until then, later.